Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video will be a review of the new Warner Archive, not just release, not just restoration, but complete resuscitation and bringing back to life of one of the iconic Hollywood classics, which of course is 1937's original version of A Star is Born, the three-strip Technicolor work of beauty produced by David O. Selznick and directed by the great William Wellman. This, for me, is still the best version of this story. It's the most immediate. It's emotionally resonant beyond belief, but the Technicolor photography really nailing the three-strip process as one of the early films, but really I think the film that shows what Technicolor could do and doesn't have the sort of working problems of figuring out the process that you have in the first couple films, starting with Becky Sharp in 1935. The other films like Garden of Allah had done really well with Technicolor, but in terms of the three-strip process, but this film I think really nailed it. And it has been in such terrible shape over the years because it fell into the public domain, and you had endless versions on VHS that were, and of course cheapy public domain DVDs as well, that were just unbelievable to sit through. So the first time I saw this film, it looked and sounded horrible, and the color was just, it was really screwed up because at one point this film did get reissued in the two-color Cinecolor process in the 1950s as part of the rights sort of changing hands in different areas. So a lot of versions were based on that. So the color was severely compromised for a long time. There were some Laserdisc releases, and finally Kino Lorber started doing more official source releases, which thankfully did help. They did that on VHS. Image handled the Laserdisc releases, and then their 2012 Blu-ray as part of their Selznick collection was the best the film had ever been on home video. It was actually mastered from David O. Selznick's personal print, but it was a print made later in the 1940s. It was made at the British Technicolor lab, and it itself had not gotten a full-scale restoration. It was pretty much an as-is presentation. So for Warner Brothers to pony up and put the money and their resources into doing one of their amazing three-strip recombining full catalog restoration overhaul projects on this film is really fantastic, and of course entirely most likely due to the great success of the newest 2018 remake. So we now have the 4 versions of the same story, and it's pretty well known that the film itself was heavily inspired by an earlier Selznick production when he was at RKO, which is 1932's What Price Hollywood, directed by George Cukor. That in and of itself is a classic, and it is available from the Warner Archive as an MOD DVD. And it makes a great comparison viewing. And of course, Cukor was originally approached to direct this film, even though it was really co-developed by William Wellman, and thankfully Cukor turned it down because he thought it was too similar to the original film they had made. And of course, RKO tried to sue Selznick for making this film, as claiming it was far too close to What Price Hollywood, which is fair in a way, but I think the idea was more of Wellman and Selznick and everyone involved wanting to do a story about Hollywood, and Selznick sort of feeling that What Price Hollywood was a solid film. It was not very financially successful in its original release, but I think the idea was sort of that he felt that they didn't quite lick it the first time around, like that they could do the story a bit better, they could go a bit further, and that's why I do think this is a superior story. There is more dramatic meat on the bones, if you will, but it makes a fascinating comparison to go back and view the earlier film. And of course, it's deeply ironic that Cukor would go on to make the very much lauded 1950s remake with Judy Garland, which itself is a classic in its own right, but it's a bit of a different film because it is also a musical. It has a much longer runtime. The focus is entirely different. But of the versions of A Star is Born, I think you can very safely say that the original version and the Cukor Judy Garland 50s versions are classics, and then the 76 version and the 2018 version, they do have a lot of the same story elements, that those never get old, so that's why they play in completely completely different generations so well, and those two versions do have their great strengths as well. But it's sort of this shared sort of strength between all four films. But for me, it is the first two versions that really have the staying power, and of them, the 1937 version is my favorite, and I think one of the great classic masterpieces of Hollywood, and one of the great three-strip Technicolor films. And so seeing it this way is just unbelievable. I wish more people would decide to check this film out now that it's available on Blu-ray, and so they can actually see it this way for the first time, because again, it is such an eye-opener that it's a little bit of a shame that the cover art is this black and white still that's very nondescript. However, I do like it in a certain way, because it is nondescript and it is black and white, and it sort of draws you in. It lets you know that this is a different edition, but it sort of wipes the slate clean, so when you put the disc in, you are just blown away at the images, because this is again one of the great Warner Brothers catalog overhauls of a three-strip Technicolor film. If it wasn't for the archive's amazing work with the Cinerama Group and the restoration of The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm and the upcoming release of Invaders from Mars, this would be the disc of the year. It is certainly, along with Brothers Grimm, one of the, it is, unbelievable restoration. It is like seeing the film for the first time. And Kino's Blu-ray, as I said, was based on Selznick's personal print. It was a dye transfer Technicolor print, but it was made in the 40s in the UK, so it wasn't exactly how the original release looked. And just as this restoration technically is better than what the original release prints look like, because in the digital realm you have the ability to perfectly combine the three Technicolor elements perfectly in a way that you couldn't do in the analog domain when making prints. So it and the color timing does technically differ from an original 1937 dye transfer print if you somehow got the chance to ever see one. But in the other areas, it does actually advance with modern technology and the digital restoration realm beyond what was possible to achieve and present in 1937 in terms of the actual printing process. So again, it is like seeing the film for the first time, and especially in comparison to the horrendous way this film has been presented on video in the past. Really, the previous Kino Blu-ray was the only watchable version that had ever existed. And since this film is in the public domain, it is beyond rare for a studio to put actual money and resources into a title that they're probably not going to make a lot of money on, because people can watch any crappy version they want to for free because it is in the public domain. So again, I think it's entirely and pretty obviously due to the success of the 2018 remake that we actually got this incredible release, and it is available for such an incredibly low price that this is one of those discs that I practically urge people to go and get, because this will give you an overnight education in three-strip Technicolor. It's one of the most beautiful color films you can look at, and as I alluded to before, it's both a completely emotional experience, as the story always is, of the young up and start heroine of our story who becomes a great actress and falls madly in love with the star who's on his way down and is a complete alcoholic. That's a story that is actually rooted in Hollywood history. It's still debated on which figures it exactly is based on, but it does seem to take elements of various couples in the silent and early sound days of Hollywood, and is unfortunately a tried and true story that never quite leaves us, because these things do happen in real life. So you get the classic emotional punch of the story that never gets old, but you also get the amazing sort of time capsule of what Hollywood in the golden age of the studio system was like, because there are little glimpses of actual location footage in Los Angeles, along with some incredible matte shots of the cityscape, which are amazing. And then, of course, you get little tiny bits of studio footage in terms of seeing some soundstage activity, but of course it is also heavily dramatized effects and heavily redesigned to be beatific in every way and larger than life. So, in a lot of ways, I think the best way to introduce this film to people who have never seen this original version, and it definitely seems like it was heavily inspiring a lot of the stuff we love in Singing in the Rain, in terms of the sort of view behind the curtain of how movies were made, and the sort of winking at the audience of we're dressing this up a little bit, but you get to see behind the curtain a little bit, and you get to see the microphones being placed, and the makeup men coming in, and the actors and actresses going through the hurdles of being in the studio system and things like that. So you get sort of the inner workings of Hollywood, which is a key portion of the film's story. Now, in terms of the overall impact, the plot and the performances really just bowl you over, because it is a two-hander between the incredible Janet Gaynor and the incredible Frederic March. This for me is still the best version of the story, because there is great focus on both the characters. Usually, in what, at least in my opinion, in some of the other versions, that focus, it definitely will shift from one to the other, and there's sort of a feeling more of being slightly disjointed, whereas this, I think, is a much more even-handed story of two people, not necessarily focusing on one over the other, and the tragedy that is looming there the entire time. It is an incredibly emotional film, and I think handled so beautifully by William Wellman, who himself was seemingly not the type of director who could do more emotional, intimate, romantic stories like this, but had a real penchant for it. Even though he was very much a man's man type, very gruff on the surface, and had seen great combat action in World War I, and of course had made the silent classic Wings before this, among other masterpieces, like one of the true masterpieces of the cinema, The Public Enemy, which introduced James Cagney to the world. So for him to be able to do this, it really shows off his softer side, and for me, I think that this is also the most genuinely emotional of all the film, all the versions. And again, that's all down to personal preference, because there are great positives to all four versions, but this is the one that really reaches me most, and I think it is the most focused in terms of the four versions. It's also, I think it's actually the shortest, so that also helps as well. And it's not a musical like the 50s Garland version, which again I also love and adore. So you can't really go wrong with any of them, but this one is the most special to me. And you definitely get that time capsule of Hollywood in the 30s flavor. So it's great in that respect as well. It is beautifully designed. It does have very heavy Art Deco elements, but mixed in with beautiful usage of Technicolor. But that also isn't just the color photography. It goes into the costumes, the makeup, the hair, the sets, the designs, the props. It's all one unified thing. And so seeing this restoration where you can see the nuances on display like you have never seen them before, particularly in little fine details, and you see a lot of additional detail in the skin tones. So you see, and in some of Janet Gaynor's close-ups, it's not just the beautiful makeup, but her vivid red, the vivid red of her hair, and also the red in her cheeks. The skin tones are far more detailed, so you'll find yourself frequently just sort of getting lost in the images. And again, if you've ever seen this film before, you will just put this disc in, and you will just be you're gonna faint. You're just literally gonna your jaw's gonna hit the floor. This is an astounding, again, it's a resuscitation is what it is, of a 3-strip Technicolor classic. It's just like what Warner Brothers has done before on other iconic classic Technicolor films, and also doing the re-registering process, which is very expensive and time consuming to re-register perfectly all three of the Technicolor elements to create a fully sharp and defined color image that, again, is technically better and superior to what the original 1937 print release looked like. So again, for For the technical specs alone, I mean, and the fact that this is frequently on sale, it's actually currently on sale for about $13 on Amazon, which is astounding. This is worth its weight in gold. It is, again, I think one of the most beautiful color films ever shot. I thought that before even seeing it look like this. I never in a million years thought this film could look and be this amazing on disc. So they really put time, effort, and money into this, and I hope that people pick this disc up because, again, this is a resuscitation. This is a bringing of a classic back to life. It is unbelievable. And I think the only reason to hang on to the old Kino disc is more for curiosity's sake, to have the Selznick 40s print version on disc so you can compare the two and see what it looks like when you scan a Technicolor print as is, because those are very difficult to transfer and they don't really cooperate with video very well. They require a lot of time and effort and massaging in the video realm. I should also mention the audio presentation, which is lossless mono DTS HDMA on this release. I don't own the Kino disc, but I've seen it before. I always meant to pick it up, but then I always hoped that somebody might do a better version. Never did I dream it would be a Warner complete overhaul like this. But this, in terms of the audio presentation, is also a big leap forward. It is very clear, but it does still have natural hiss in it and hasn't been noise reduced to death or anything. But I don't have, like, for example, the prior Laserdisc or VHS releases of official versions to compare it against. Primarily what I've seen is, like everybody else, the just god awful public domain versions that are all over the place, but in just atrocious quality. So if that's all you've ever seen, or you've caught a crappy version, even usually the versions that TCM would air are just terrible in quality. So or even if you own the Kino disc and that's the version you've seen, again, you were literally going to pass out. You will not be able to believe what this is like. In terms of the packaging and design, it is very simple in the Warner Archive style, but with this beautiful label on the disc, again in black and white. So it's like it's priming you for you are not ready for this. You were just not ready, and then you put the disc in, and it's just like. So, and that, of course, adds to the emotional impact of the experience. So, again, this is a truly great and very emotional, very powerful film. I still think it is the best version of this classic story, even though I do still absolutely adore the 1950s version. But this is unbelievable for its restoration quality. I think the only real quirk I noticed is there is one tiny spot where I noticed where it seemed like there was maybe a frame or two missing. So there was a very, very, very extremely tiny little jump, but I think that might simply be down to how the elements are, and just because they are working from the original negative here, and that just may be part of the film itself. But that was the only quibble I had, and it was so fleeting I almost didn't even notice it. This is without doubt one of the best discs of the year, one of the restorations of the decade. I don't think that's an understatement. I mean, if it were, again, for Brothers Grimm, really, this would be restoration of the year, or perhaps tied with it. It is an unbelievable upgrade. This is, again, it was really unthinkable before this point that this film would ever get this sort of treatment, especially because it was in the public domain and the versions we have were just so heavily compromised. And the fact that this is just a standard Warner Archive release and dirt cheap, I hope people are aware of the work that went into this, because this should be a disc that everyone picks up. It is that staggering in its quality, and that, again, only adds to the impact of the film, which is massive. So this is definitely one of the films you don't watch if you want something happy. So, but it's also got great humor in it. So it's also one of those films that is very emotional, but has has many different facets. So it's not just a downer. It's not just a three hanky picture in terms of crying into multiple handkerchiefs. But again, it has great focus, but it is a human drama, and it's a must for any fan of classic Hollywood who loves Hollywood history. It is a real two-hander between the leads, and their performances will just hit you right in the feels. And again, it is still my favorite and preferred version of the classic A Star is Born story. Now, to talk a little bit about the extras, unfortunately, but as is common with most Warner Archive releases, there are no new extras technically. So I wish there had been something about the restoration that would have been great and fascinating to see. But unfortunately, that we don't have anything about that. And it would have been nice to have an audio commentary from a great critic who I think could go to town talking about the different versions. But of course, some of that material is covered in the nice extras package that is pretty extensive on the 1950s version. So if you have that release, or you're looking for, if you want to know more about this film, you can look to the remake from the 50s, because that does have some pretty nice extras on its Blu-ray release. And also, I should mention that William Wellman's son, William Wellman Jr., wrote a really great book on his father that I do highly recommend, literally called Wild Bill Wellman, which was the name he was known for. And it is very revealing of his incredible back history before he became a great director, and his long-running career, and all the various different genres he worked in terms of films, and all the great stars he worked with, but also his great sensitivity underneath the gruff exterior. So even though he had a sort of maverick reputation, he could do emotional powerhouses like this film, the original A Star is Born. And I do think Wellman is one of the unheralded great directors of the golden age of Hollywood. He should be discussed in much greater reverence, and unfortunately isn't. In a lot of respects, he is like George Cukor in that way, but at least Cukor did make some of the most iconic films of all time, whereas Wellman made at least two or three, like this film, The Public Enemy, and a handful of others, but he never quite has gotten that name recognition. So I do highly recommend Wellman's book on his father. That is the greatest source for more information about the great William Wellman. In terms of the extras that are on the disc, though, we do have an HD presentation of the classic Merry Melodies short, which actually came out the next year in 1938, called A Star is Hatched, which, even though it's sort of light on story and plot, it's a great spoof of Hollywood and the studio system, where you have the wannabe starlet actress coming from the small town and getting to the big city and getting to Hollywood and basically having her hopes shattered and seeing how things are really done. And it's, of course, very heavily inspired by the start and key basic story idea of A Star is Born with the Janet Gaynor character, and it's full of so many great gags, and it's something that you've probably already seen if you're a fan of classic Hollywood or a fan of Looney Tunes, but it's great to have included here, and it is actually in HD and looks fantastic. Now, the other extras are three various short subject materials. They are all in standard def. I don't know, I think they have been released on some various DVDs before, but I don't know if all of them have come out. But Warner was very good about restoring a lot of their classic short subjects that they owned the rights to, and they would pop up on various DVDs and such. So that was great to have, because this is the kind of stuff that if it's not preserved somehow, it's not going to last, and you're not going to have any way to access it. And it's, as always, a totally fascinating artifact of its time. These are things that you're never going to see the likes of again. And then also, as a really nice touch, they did add 2 vintage radio adaptations. So you have the 1937 version with Janet Gaynor and Robert Montgomery, and of course it's condensed down to about an hour. And then, rather interestingly, you have a 1942 version with Walter Pidgeon and Judy Garland. So Judy Garland actually did the A Star is Born story on radio in 1942, uh, literally at least a decade before she would appear in the musical remake. So that's a fascinating thing to examine. And in a really wonderful touch, Warner Archive has actually encoded these in HDMA as well. So they are DTS, HDMA, and lossless, which is very rare for vintage radio programs when they're presented on Blu-ray releases, even very frequently for space reasons. And since the quality is usually not the greatest to begin with, they're lossy Dolby Digital mono. But I was very surprised when looking at those that they were losslessly encoded. So that was something that was a really nice touch, and it's something that they didn't have to do. But for me, the single best extra is the presentation of the theatrical trailer, and Warner Brothers has gone in and actually restored that as well with a high bit rate. So it is in HD. It is brand newly restored. It is also Technicolor as well, but it's very important because it does have exclusive footage. And in the best touch, they actually stage William Wellman and the real crew as if they're actually photographing the scene that's photographed in the film when they're on the sound stage. So they actually have some custom footage of Wellman on set, and it's obviously playing up for the cameras a little bit. But it's one of those trailers that's very important because it does have exclusive footage, and made even more special because you've actually got the director on camera on the set. So it's one of those rare trailers where they use the director as the selling point. It was rare for studios to use director, producer, writer, some major crew players. So in that sense, it's sort of like the famous trailer for The Shop Around the Corner, where Ernst Lubitsch himself walks out and helps to sell the film by his name alone. So that was really special. And again, it has been fully restored. It is Technicolor, it is in HD, and it's got a maxed out bitrate just like the feature. So that was something I didn't expect. I thought it was just going to be an old standard def version of the trailer. So that was actually part of the restoration process as well, just like the film. So that was an amazing treat, and for me is actually the highlight of the entirety of the extras package. So again, I wish there was something about the documentary, and I wish there was a new commentary, but again, Warner Archive does have to operate on a significant budget, so it is very rare for them to be able to do brand new extras, specially created for their releases. So that's why when they even do have any extras, it is a really special thing to celebrate. And even though these are, for the most part, taken from pre-existing things that they had in the Warner vaults or already archived as standard def in terms of the short subjects, it's really welcome to have any special features on an archive release, and just the icing on the cake of this absolutely incredible restoration that is one of the finest discs of the year, is a must-own release. Even if you're not a giant fan of the story itself and you've seen the other versions and you don't think that you want to see the same story again, do yourself a favor, get a copy of this. It is dirt cheap for the amount of care that went into this restoration, which is astounding. I can't put enough superlatives on this release because, again, I was just floored. Never in a million years did I think this film could be this good. And I think the only way to improve upon this is if it got a 4K UHD release, which it does deserve. I do think, and especially seeing it this way in the restoration, I do think this is one of the finest 3-strip Technicolor films ever made. And again, seeing it this way is like seeing it for the first time, and all you can do is just marvel at the power it still has in both its story, but also the incredible photography and the incredible attention to quality that is attached to everything that had Selznick's name on it. So you can't escape that, and it's all of this stuff plus that it's a Hollywood time capsule for the period that still makes it the essential version of this story for me, and in my personal favorite, and the one that I feel is the best of the four. So I hope more people check this out, since it is now available in this incredible restoration for a bargain price, because a lot of people have been drawn in by seeing the newest remake and loving it, and then they are curious about the older versions. But since this film was stuck in the public domain and in terrible versions, it was usually not necessarily the one that people would go and seek out. So this finally fixes that issue, and now people can see the film for the first time in quality it has simply never had before. It was always there, but since it was really stuck in public domain hell for a long time, this has been a long time coming. So this is one of the discs of the year. It is another must-own title from the Warner Archive. It is one of the flagship Warner restorations with their MPI department, and one of the flagship examples of 3-strip Technicolor beauty on disc. It is simply put, a must-own title. I cannot encourage you to pick this up enough. It is without question one of the discs of the year and one of the absolute classics of 1930s golden age Hollywood productions, and one of the great gems of the Selznick library. So that is Warner Archive's release of the original 1937 version of A Star is Born, directed by William Wellman, one of the great films about Hollywood, and I hope that people pick this up in droves so we can show the support that restoration work for truly important titles like this, that support is out there. So you can only do that by purchasing copies of this release. It is very inexpensive, and it's a great way to show that you support film preservation, because it is still an ongoing thing. It's something that's never going to go away, and there are so many titles that still are in dire need of assistance, help, and complete resuscitation like this film. So by buying a copy of this, you show that you support film preservation, film culture, and the complete bringing back from the dead of iconic masterpieces of the cinema like A Star is Born. So again, please check this out. It is very inexpensive, so you are not going to be disappointed. It is one of the most astonishing modern restorations, and it brings this film back from the dead. It truly does. So again, that is Warner Archive's release of the original 1937 A Star is Born on Blu-ray, one of the finest Blu-rays of this year, and yet another of the must-own Warner Archive titles that really just is unbelievable in its quality and presentation. So as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've already picked up this release and seen the amazing restoration for yourself, or if you have experience with some of the really crummy old public domain versions and know how badly this film was treated over the years, this is such a revelation. So as always, I would love to hear from you guys. If you have thoughts about this release, or you were thinking about picking it up, I hope this has convinced you. Again, this is a staggering Blu-ray. This is one of those discs you own a player for. It is that revelatory. And again, I do think it is one of the finest 3-strip Technicolor films ever photographed. So that in and of itself, and the restoration, it just makes it a must-own. But the fact that it is such an incredibly powerful story, so beautifully performed, written, directed, and produced, it is one of the iconic Hollywood films. So as always, I just want to say, keep supporting studio and boutique labels, keep your disc spinning, keep physical media alive, and thanks ever so much for watching.